Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Another edition of Ripped from the Headlines. And here we have a recent one. When I saw it, I just kind of had to flag it because I figured there had to be a shear in here somewhere. And I'm referring to a press conference last week with the president's spokesperson, Karoline Leavitt. Don't know if she's Jewish. Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't know. Could be. Maybe without the A, with the A. I don't know how which one's the more Jewish one. But it might even be pronounced Leavitt. I don't know. Apologies. There was a question that kind of probably was very perplexing and maybe even incomprehensible to some of the other reporters. But it definitely caught the attention of the Jewish world and certainly the Orthodox world. And it comes from one of the Orthodox correspondents. If you've ever watched the press conferences, you'll see all the reporters, the gaggle that's in there. And, they're Jewish. There's Jewish media. There are Israeli reporters, obviously. We know that who gets to sit where was a subject of discussion and dispute in terms of, the White House press corps. But you see in source number one, White House pressed on whether President Trump plans to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. So that headline comes from a Jewish news outlet. It was covered by the Times of Israel. It was covered by Jerusalem Post. I did not see this covered as much in the mainstream media because probably people weren't really sure exactly what was going on with that. But it was during source number one, during Thursday's press conference, press briefing, Mishpacha Magazine's White House correspondent, see now you know Mishpacha Magazine has a White House correspondent, Jake Turks, posed a striking question to Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, asking whether President Trump has discussed plans to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, or Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Leavitt responded, no, it has not. Now, I think the bigger story is the fact that she knew how to respond to the question. Whether she knows what the Holy Temple in Jerusalem was meant to be or not, she knew what to do, and she said no. Great. Turks, known for mixing humor and sarcasm into his questions, added that the president will go down as the greatest builder of his era, referring to Trump's plans for the new White House ballroom unveiled earlier this week, and that was the context in which he asked this question. The exchange quickly drew attention online, with many noting the unusual nature of a reporter bringing up the rebuilding of the ancient temple, a deeply symbolic subject in Jewish faith, during a White House press briefing. Right, we definitely live in, these were not the questions being asked of LBJ or even Ronald Reagan. We definitely are living in a different age in terms of how the rise of Jewish media and Orthodox media could be a whole separate subject. But that's the question: is the president going to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash? One may say that these are Mashiach's times if the question can even be asked. Okay, so that was the question. Now, Jake explained a little bit what he was thinking when asking this question. In source number two, this was Israel National News. That's Arutz Sheva. Followed up this story just a couple of days ago. Jewish White House reporter Jake Turks responded to the discourse regarding whether U.S. President Donald Trump will rebuild the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Speaking to Belaz, which is another ultra-Orthodox Hasidic news outlet, Turks explained, if there's one thing Trump understands, it's leverage. The problem is he couldn't figure out how to get leverage over Hamas. In his opinion, the solution is very simple. Tell Hamas that if they won't disarm, control of the Temple Mount will be transferred solely to the Jews. They don't care about anybody's kids. They'll sacrifice everybody. The one thing they will not sacrifice is Har Habayis. He explained, adding, I'm not saying let's go up and build the Beis Hamikdash the second. I'm saying let's put Har Habayis on the table. And if that doesn't work and Hamas does not disarm, then we'll have to figure out about building the Beis Hamikdash. But for now, let's just use it for leverage. Now, there's also a video of some of his comments on this. Okay, that's his position. He thinks it's pressure, it's leverage. Now, there has been discussions among some of the various political analysts in terms of one of the ways that Israel's enemies often pull back is when Israel takes more of the land. That's part of the Gaza discussion. Here you have an ultra-Orthodox journalist saying you should apply the same thing to the Temple Mount, and it was not about. It was about if Trump would say he is, and this might help pressure Hamas. Okay, that's the political strategy. That's the question. That's the headline. Now, could he build the Beis Hamikdash? Who does build the Beis Hamikdash? Right? This is definitely an issue. We've touched on the Temple Mount before, and the like. But let's the idea of building the Beis Hamikdash, just in general, is it still a mitzvah, for example, to build the Beis Hamikdash? Right? There's certainly mitzvahs that we should do but aren't doing. Maybe we should be more proactive in doing. Questions: who's building that Beis Hamikdash? Maybe also to touch upon whether it's appropriate for a non-Jew to have a role in that construction, and in general, what's the role for a non-Jew participating in Jewish holy practices, sacrifices, which we know non-Jews would contribute towards sacrifices, or can they contribute? Forget about if we move it away from the whole Gaza Hamas discussion. We are talking about a president who likes to put his name on his construction projects, right? So the question may be, what about the dedication plaque, right? Maybe Trumpian stone, as Hirsch is suggesting, is not enough because it doesn't have his name on it. But what if we put like a big Trump sign on the Beis Hamikdash? Or if we bring it to more practical issues, what about a dedication plaque on a shul that has a non-Jewish contributor or non-Jewish donation of a Sefer Torah and the like? So we have raised the issue of, can Donald Trump build a third temple, or will Donald Trump build a third temple, from a journalist who was approaching it from a geopolitical, strategic direction, and we'll bring some Torah to the conversation. So we start with the mitzvah to build the Beis Hamikdash, which comes from a very well-known verse: "You shall make for me a sanctuary, v'asu li mikdash." And here's the Rambam formulation of it. Source number 3 from the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvot, Book of Commandments. That is, we are commanded to build a choice house for the divine service. In Hebrew, it's called Beit HaBechira, choice house. We'll come back to that in a few sources as well. In which there will be sacrifices and eternal burning of fire, in which there shall be journeying and pilgrimage on the festivals and gatherings every year. You got to have this temple. And that is his saying, and they shall make me a sanctuary. And the language of the Sifrei, the Midrash, that there are 3 commandments commanded to Israel upon their entrance into the land: to appoint a king over themselves, to build themselves a choice house, and to cut off the seed of Amalek. Right? This is the idea of when they entered Israel. These were their orders of business. They needed a king, they needed a Beis Hamikdash, and they also had to destroy the evil Amalek. Behold, it has been made clear to you that the building of the choice house is a separate commandment. Right? It was not just kind of the strategy doing all these things. There's a specific commandment to make a Beit HaMikdash, to build a sanctuary, to build that choice house. And this is part of the conversation, that not all of the vessels have the same level of separate mitzvah obligation. You don't have a mitzvah on everybody to build all the other accoutrements. They do talk about Mizbeach and Menorah, but in general, the mitzvah that's upon the community is to build the Beit HaBechira, the choice house, the temple. Now, you may be wondering, that was then. When they entered the land, they had the commandment. Guess what? They did it. They built it. It was destroyed. They built it again. So maybe, and we have a promise of a third temple, but is that really binding upon us? Right? Especially, is that a commandment that you and I right now are missing out on if we're not fulfilling? Right? And so one of the things that the Rambam writes about the formulation or the compilation of the mitzvot in his Sefer HaMitzvot, it has to do with the fact that if you read through the Torah, there are all sorts of declarations and statements and directives and commandments. How do you get to this idea of 613 commandments? Right? It's kind of a great question. This idea of 613 is very much certainly a very successful and effective branding exercise in Torah terminology and in terms of tradition. The idea of 613 commandments is kind of etched in stone. What are they is harder to figure out. We have the tradition, the rabbis mentioned in the Talmud, that there's 613 commandments. How do we know there's 613 commandments? If we go through, we can find 727, we can find 584. Why there's 613? So the rabbis have a tradition. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe commanded us the Torah. The Hebrew word Torah has the gematria, has a numerical value of not 613, 611. So wait a second, why are there not 611 commandments? Because the tradition is that when God started presenting those commandments to the Jewish nation, the first two of those commandments, first two of the 10 in the Aseret HaDibrot were, I am the Lord your God, no other gods besides me. Those came directly from God, and the other 611 from Moshe. I mean, that's the tradition that's referenced in the text itself, that the Jewish people couldn't really handle the direct communication from the divine, and therefore Moses served as intermediary. So God presented directly to Moses, was intermediary for 611. Don't need high mathematics to know 611 plus 2 is 613. Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe Marasha Kilas Yaakov. We have 613 commandments because the word Torah has 611 plus 2. It's kind of like typical, Jewish backwards, use your right arm to scratch your left ear type of formulation. But that's how 613 became so successfully ingrained in the number of commandments. Now, you still have to identify them. And here we have different interpretations, different identifications. You have the Rambam, you have the Sefer HaMitzvot of Rav Saadia Gaon. You have all sorts of attempts. You have all sorts of attempts to collect which are the 613 commandments. And therefore, it's not always that simple. And there's also a difference. So the Rambam lays out exactly what were his rules in terms of how he figured out or how he wanted to count them, how he came about his 613. And one of the things he says is source number 4, when he's going through the different rules that he used to determine whether something is a commandment or a statement or a duplicate. She'ein roi limnos mitzvah she'ein noheges l'doros. You don't count things which are not eternally binding. So what the Rambam is saying is that the commandment to build a temple must be relevant to us right now. Otherwise, he wouldn't count it. If it was only something that was applicable at certain times and not others, he wouldn't count it as a commandment. And so basically, if we see from the Rambam, who is commanded to build the temple? Each and every one of us until this very day. Right? The Rambam kind of further spells it out in source number 5, where in his laws of Beit HaBechira, where he talks about the rules and regulations and construction of the temple, where he even points out the idea that it's dependent on both men and women. It's not a positive time-bound commandment. Men and women have an equal obligation and responsibility in this. So we have a commandment to build the Beis HaMikdash. Men and women, everyone has to do it. Now, when we start, not everyone agrees with the Rambam, but we're looking at it from that approach. In general, building the third temple is something that is in theory on our radar screens. That's something that we have to do, something that each and every one of us has to do. Okay, so let's delve a little bit more deeply into a couple of the details that the Rambam spells out in source number 5. It says we must not build the temple at night. As it states, on the day in which the sanctuary was raised up, it was finished in the daytime. Our sages interpret this phrase as implying we may raise it up by day and not by night. We must be involved with its building from dawn until the appearance of the stars. Everyone is obligated to build and to assist both personally and financially, both men and women, as in the construction of the sanctuary in the desert. Nevertheless, children are not to be interrupted from their Torah studies. The construction of the temple does not supersede the observance of the festival. So let's unpack some of these details. One, it's a daytime activity, but it's not a daytime mitzvah, right? If it was just during the day, then how can women be obligated? Women are obligated in participating, right? Everyone is obligated to build and to assist personally and financially, right? And this is, connected to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, where everyone had a role. Okay, children are not involved. It's an interesting formulation because the kids have to study. If they're gonna use the Beis HaMikdash, they have to be educated Jewishly. This is part of the conversation of the importance of Jewish education. Jewish education is so to be able to participate in the actualization. So therefore, kids are in school, adults are building the temple. And then you have this idea here that it does not supersede the observance of the festivals, right? We know that very famously, we learned some of the laws of Shabbos from the laws of the Mishkan, and that they didn't build the Mishkan, the tabernacle, on Shabbos, because the building of the Mishkan does not supersede Shabbos. Same thing with the festivals. So we have, the idea there's a mitzvah applies to everyone during the day, not the night, and it doesn't supersede Shabbos or Yom Tov. So we have in the Gemara, the rabbis were having a discussion as to some of the rules that were implemented with regards to the temple practice, as well as ensuring that that temple practices would not be forgotten. And within that discussion, there's a conversation in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah about things that we do to remember the destruction of the temple, which is called Zecher L'Churban, remembering the destruction, but also Zecher L'Mikdash, to do certain things to remember the temple's practices. So Zecher L'Churban, we know about like the 9 days in Tisha B'Av, and the ashes on the forehead of the Chatan, or the breaking of the glass, that's all to remember the destruction. Zecher L'Mikdash, to remember the operations in the temple, that's actually very recently, we were just performing this for the whole holiday. For example, the Torah says that you should take the Lulav Nesrog on one day, on the first day of Sukkot. Our tradition is that in the Beis HaMikdash, they took it for all days of Sukkot. And the Talmud, and it's in Rosh Hashanah, where we're going to be looking at Rashi there, talks about that we did that to remember the fact that there was this 7-day Lulav and Esrog at one point in the Mikdash. We're going to do that today also. So that's why on Sukkot we take the Lulav and Esrog all the days of Sukkot, not just one day, to remember the operations of the temple. And so there are other rules and regulations that were there, and within the discussion of those rules and regulations, they are discussing about having, this one in particular has to do with the Omer. The Omer, we're used to counting the 49 days of the Omer from the second day of Pesach, but the Omer was a barley offering that was brought on the 16th of Nisan. And they're discussing the timing of it, and they want to make sure that we want to be able to have the same time frame. And they're talking about, even in contemporary times where we don't have the sacrifice, maybe next year we'll have a temple, there will be a sacrifice, and we want to make sure we get the timing right. And in terms of getting that timing right, we want to be able to say, well, we did it when it should, please God, the temple be rebuilt. And we refer back to when we did the practice of allowing the new wheat based on the Omer last year. We want to be able to get things consistently right. And so it seems that they're factoring in the possibility of the Beis HaMikdash being built on the first day of Pesach. And that bothers Rashi, as it should. We saw the Rambam quoted the idea that you can't build the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Tov. So how could you even potentially, theoretically, the rabbis raise the possibility of the temple being built on a festival? Right? I always like this idea, there's the idea, remember, it says the Beis HaMikdash can't be built at night, so there's an idea that Mashiach can't come at night. So I always like to say, well, what happens if Mashiach comes at night? So that'll be the first question we ask him, if they're not supposed to come at night. So maybe it should be the same thing here. If the Beis HaMikdash gets rebuilt on Yom Tov, we could ask, how can it get rebuilt on Yom Tov? But Rashi asked the question, how could they potentially, even theoretically, entertain the possibility of the temple being built on a holiday? V'im tomar hechi mashkachas, source 6. The ivne b'chamesar b'yontif, the ivne b'leila. How can we even have this idea that possibly they're building on the 15th, they're building at night? Why would the rabbis even talk about such a thing? We have an explicit mention, the ein binyan beis hamikdash lo b'yontif lo b'leila. The Talmud says elsewhere, this is what the Rambam quoted in source 5, no building of the temple on festivals or nighttime. Hani mili binyan b'dei adam. Well, people can't build the beis hamikdash by day, by night or by holiday. The future temple will be built in heaven, and therefore the heavenly temple will be constructed on festivals or at nighttime. And the Rashi has this idea elsewhere, where he mentions in Rashi in Sukkah source 7, Mikdash ha'asid sh'anu mitzapim banui u'meshuchlal yigalev v'yavo mishamayim. The temple that we are waiting for is being built in heaven, and it will be revealed. It will come down from heaven. Right? This is a tradition that's out there. I remember, being educated about this tradition. The idea that really each of the good things, the mitzvot that we do, puts a brick, and if we do the wrong thing, it takes away a brick. It's almost the way the Rambam formulates our good deeds and our misdeeds. right? You have to have the majority of the good deeds in order to be righteous. So it's the same thing with the Beis Hamikdash. We have to do our good deeds to build the temple, and once that final brick is done, the temple will be revealed. I kept wondering, like, what's going to happen to like the structures on the Temple Mount? Is it going to just flatten them? This is the 9-year-old's imagination in day school. But it seems that there is this idea that there will be a heavenly construction. Right? That sounds like a good name for a construction, contractor or someone who does construction. Heavenly construction. But that seems to be a position that Rashi feels helps us understand difficult rabbinic indications, as well as how it's going to play out. And if that's the case, we seem to have a machlokas between the Rambam, who says we have to build it, because the Rambam says we have to build the third Beis Hamikdash. It's still a mitzvah. But Rashi says we're not going to build the Beis Hamikdash because it is coming from heaven. So which is it? So maybe we'll have to ask Mashiach when he comes. Now there are those who are really let's cover both our bases. Let's do all the right things so that our heavenly temple is completed and comes down, and let's do all the right things to prepare for it now by the Third Temple Institute, for example, building the vessels, building the menorah, the altar, etc., etc. So how do we resolve the machlokas between Rambam and Rashi on this redemptive issue? So there are a number of approaches, and some of them. One is Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, who was one of the rabbis in the late 18th, 19th century in Germany. So on his commentary in Sukkah, and you see Sukkah 41a is where this comes up, where Rashi mentions this. So Rabbi Ettlinger says, here's how I would thread the needle. Nira lefiani is dati. Devadai Beis Hamikdash liyasud lovo yiboneh binyan mamash bidei adam. We got to build it. But what about Rashi? And what about Rashi's based on the verse of Mikdash Hashem konenu yadech, where we say, Lord, your hands will establish the temple, right? Where the Midrash says Yered lemata, that's going to come down. Hu Beis Hamikdash ruchani. It's the soul of the temple. Sheyavo l'toch Beis Hamikdash hanivneh gashmi. It's the soul of the Beis Hamikdash which will suffuse or infuse the physical structure. Similar to neshama b'soch haguf. It's like us. We have a body, and we are suffused with the soul. Same thing we saw in the tabernacle, right? They finish it all up, and Hashem, Moshe, wants the spirit of Hashem to come down. And he says this is like the idea of the fire in the temple, right? We always talk about the altar which had a fire on it. We also have this idea that the fire came down and consumed. So it's a heavenly fire, it's an earthly fire, and he says that's the same thing. Based on Mikdash, ha'esh shel mala, tocha esh shel hedyot, shenevar be'etzim, right? If you have a heavenly fire, why do you need a fire? Why do you need wood? Why do you need all this preparation? No, it's the merging, it's the synthesis of the heavenly and the earthly, the spiritual and the temporal, the body and the soul. Right? That's how we are bringing it all together. And so we have to build the Beis Hamikdash, and if we do ours and do the right thing, then from Shemayim will come this. Will come the holiness that will then animate the Beis Hamikdash. So we have an idea. There's a mitzvah to build the Beis Hamikdash. It still applies. We have what to do. God has what to do. The idea is to make it all happen in one completion. B'mheira v'yameinu, amen. Okay, so that's the mitzvah of the Beis Hamikdash. What about now? In all of this building, what about non-Jewish participation? Right, and so getting back to if we for Jake Turks' question, well, let's say we move it away from the geopolitical to the architectural. Can he do it? Can non-Jews build the Beis Hamikdash? So Rabbi Avigdor Nebenzahl, rabbi of the old city of Jerusalem, has an article about building the Beis Hamikdash, which translated to English, and you can see it online. And he quotes there the source of the Tiferes Yisrael, one of the commentaries on the Mishnah. Yisrael Lifshitz, who also very creative, has a whole host of interesting articles on subjects, including the building of the third Beis Hamikdash. So Rabbi Nebenzahl quotes the Tiferes Yisrael that mentions that in the future, non-Jews will build the walls of the temple. So they're able to do some of the construction. And they're permitted to work even on Jewish festival days, right? So the Tiferes Yisrael addresses non-Jewish participation in the construction or the building of the Beis HaMikdash, as well as, maybe that's the type of work that takes place on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And then, of course, we have to go, well, how can a non-Jew do for us what we can't do on Shabbos? Right? We're not allowed to tell non-Jews to work for us on Shabbos. Right? Even though it's forbidden to build a house on a festival via non-Jewish labor, it may be that the sages did not intend to include such a great religious obligation as this in their prohibition. Maybe the temple is too big to be included in this concern. So you have, again, the Tiferes Yisrael mentioning a role of building the Beis HaMikdash being so important that we will invite, allow, and maybe even encourage non-Jewish building, at least of part of the Beis HaMikdash. So I'm not sure what Jake Turks was thinking about this in particular, but we do have, within our discussion of building the temple, the idea of non-Jewish participation in that building. Now, some of you may have been thinking about the role of the Persian King Cyrus in the building of the Beis HaMikdash, right? Very famously, when the Jews were in Persia, right? This kind of dovetails chronologically within the Purim story. There was the permission granted by King Cyrus of the Jews to go back and to rebuild their temple. Right? That had been the whole discussion. All the prophecies had talked about a 70-year exile. They're itching to go back. So as recounted in the book of Ezra, source 10, first year of the King Cyrus of Persia, when the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah was fulfilled, the Lord roused the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia to issue a proclamation throughout his realm by word of mouth and in writing as follows. Thus said King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth and has charged me with building him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Right? Cyrus sees this as his divine, from God, from Hashem, as a mission to build the temple. Any one of you, all of his people, may his God be with him. Let him go to Jerusalem that is in Judah and build the house of the Lord God of Israel, the God that is in Jerusalem. So he announces those who want to go should go, and God should bless them. So he's not participating in the building, but he's facilitating and allowing and encouraging. Now, it's not that simple because unfortunately, not that many people wanted to go. They liked it in the diaspora. Who would have thunk that that's possible? Also, it wasn't that simple because not everyone was very happy that King Cyrus did this, and they pushed back. In subsequent chapters in the book of Ezra, it tells the story of those who said that no, the Jews are going to do this, and they're going to then feel more independent and separate from the kingdom, and it will cause difficulty, and therefore the construction efforts were stopped. So it's not all that simple, but we have an approach, and we certainly have the verses mentioning that the second temple was Cyrus feeling that God wanted him to be involved in it. Okay, so I think that it gives us, and King Cyrus is mentioned, in a positive fashion because of this. And there are those in the rabbinic literature that try to connect this to Esther and the aftermath. The chronology doesn't really work out all that well. They do try to put the son of Esther and Ahasuerus within this discussion. So it's really a Jewish effort, but you have King Cyrus facilitating, encouraging the construction of Beis HaMikdash. Great. The rabbis seem to even give more credit than the credit that might be due for this effort. Source number 11, the Gemara in Megillah. Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda interpreted homiletically a verse concerning Cyrus. What is the meaning of that which is written about Cyrus in the book of Isaiah? Thus said the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held. Right? Seemingly refers to Cyrus as God's anointed. Now, was Cyrus God's anointed one? Right? The Hebrew in the verse is Mashiach. So Cyrus the Mashiach, right? Rather, the verse should be understood as God speaking to the Messiah with regard to Cyrus. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to the Messiah, I am complaining to you about Cyrus, who was not acting in accordance with what he's intended to do. I had said, he shall build my house and gather my exiles, but he did not carry this out. Rather, he said, whoever is among you of all his people, let him go up to Jerusalem. He gave permission to return to Israel, but he did no more than that. So you have here kind of a offline conversation about Cyrus, about how the rabbis view Cyrus. And on the one hand, they're picking up on a verse which seems to call Cyrus the Mashiach and saying, no, he's not the Mashiach. God is talking to the Mashiach about how Cyrus had shortcomings. But it's a very strange Gemara. It seems that if you're mentioning Cyrus and Mashiach in the same breath, there seems to be this possibility that Cyrus is being elevated, at least being thought of as the Mashiach, until the rabbis, shoot it down and criticize Cyrus. But it seemed to be saying that Cyrus could have been Mashiach, which is, kind of amazing. It's just how do we understand that? So the Rashba here in Megillah says that, really, it's the fact that Cyrus could have been had he finished the job. Right? This really had to be finished by Mashiach, not by Cyrus. But he could have been, right? Instead of Cyrus saying, go back and build it, he should have said, I'm coming with you to build it. But therefore, he did not do this. Lo yiglu golus shnia, lo yicharev odei habayis. Kinyan mamarim bikeyish shakadosh baruch hu lasus Chizkiyahu melech hamashiach. The Rashba sees in this kind of the road not taken, and we have this idea of the rabbis that Chizkiyahu, who was at the end of the first Beis Hamikdash, could have been Mashiach but wasn't, and it led to the destruction of the first temple and the exile. The Rashbas entertained the possibility that this is a lesson here. The way the rabbis understand this conversation unfolding between God and Mashiach about Cyrus is to remind us that we each have this incredible potential, and that this conversation we should be internalizing the fact that Cyrus could have been Mashiach. We should see the fact that Cyrus, instead of instructing people to build, had he taken the bull by the horns and actually ensured the construction of the second Beis Hamikdash, there would have been no destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. So if you have an idea, if you have a nice idea, which is wonderful, see it to the end. Because if you just get it started, it becomes incomplete. Who knows about all the missed opportunities, right? They always talk about don't cry over spilt milk. This is the opposite. Cry over the spilt milk. We shouldn't even be in exile now. If it's Cyrus's fault, he should have seen the opportunity and seized the moment. And so therefore, that's what the Rashba sees as the moral lesson of this Gemara, not necessarily its historical accuracy and the like, or necessarily the role Cyrus should technically have played in the construction of the Beis Hamikdash. At the same time, it is kind of interesting how you have what we would call the Havamina. I would think possibly that Cyrus could be Mashiach. And, I am sure somewhere within this whole conversation of will Donald Trump build the Beis Hamikdash, I'm sure there's messianic, associations being played into, the role of, Cyrus and in the role that he could have been Mashiach, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's actually a book out there about Trump and the Messiah in the temple or something from a Christian perspective. When, Googling around for this year, some of those books came up. But I think that, we see here certainly the potential role of Cyrus in facilitating it, even though the Rashba takes it in a different direction, more as moralistic lessons for us from the story about our potential to get things done and to make lasting change and being able to change history for the better, and not the way that Cyrus did. So we talked about there's a mitzvah to build the Beis Hamikdash. It's on us. There'll be divine infusion of spirituality from it. It's a joint effort. The idea of a non-Jewish role in the Beis Hamikdash, technically within construction, we saw that from the Tiferes Yisrael, and then kind of holistically, thematically with the role of Cyrus, even to potentially entertain his role as potential Mashiach. But of course, that's not really about his role as Mashiach, but more, as the Rashba says, our role of being able to change history if we are able to actualize our best intentions. I want to just finish by talking about the what about contributing? What about the role of non-Jewish participation in building the Beis HaMikdash, building a shul, building anything? So within the Shulchan Aruch talks about that in general, we're not really so keen on accepting charity from non-Jews. Right? This goes to the larger discussion between the relation between Jew and idolater, which is very negative, and the Jew and idolatry, also negative, prohibited. Anything that's idolatrous can't be incorporated into Judaism in all sorts of levels. So the way the Shulchan Aruch captures this halacha, source 13, an Israelite is forbidden to accept charity from heathens in public. But if he cannot subsist on Jewish charity alone, he's unable to receive it from heathens without public notice. In that case, it's permitted. So we're kind of down on idolatrous charity. If a heathen prince donates money for Jewish charities, the money should be accepted for the sake of peace. We don't want to insult him. But it should be distributed among non-Jewish poor secretly so the prince might not hear of it. Right? Basically, non-Jew wants to give the Jews charity, accept it, and then regift it, essentially, to non-Jews, so you don't have to accept it. The Ramah, some hold that if he specified the purpose, the money should be devoted to that purpose. If the non-Jew says, I want this to go to this family, or to this synagogue, or to this effort, then the Ramah says, some hold it's okay. And then donations towards the erection of a synagogue are always accepted. Okay, so let's kind of unpack some of the discussion, because I think what emerges is that, as we said before, there's general displeasure, distaste, even prohibition of a Jew accepting something from idolatry. Right? Just like a Jew is not allowed to contribute towards idolatry, the Jew shouldn't accept idolatry. At the same time, if there's a great need, don't look a gift horse in the mouth, right? No one says you have to starve rather than accept. This is not idolatry, that you're not eating idols. The support can be helpful and welcome. Distasteful, right? If you could find a way to, no one know about it, that's always better. If you can't, prominent figure insists, or it's specified. There seems to be an allowance. So it starts off with, it's kind of a no with lots of loopholes in it, and those loopholes ultimately allow for more acceptance along the way. And the commentators, and one of them, source number 14, the Be'er Heitev, captures it, some of the rationale. Because look, the Jewish nation in the Gemara is full of situations. We accept sacrifices from non-Jews. We talked about remembering temple times with the holiday of Sukkot by holding the rule of Nesser both 7 days. We read in the Torah each day of Sukkot about all the different sacrifices which were associated with whom? All the daily 70 sacrifices of Sukkot are associated with the 70 nations of the world. It's recognizing the universal participation in Judaism. All right, so we have to kind of separate the idolaters from the non-idolaters, today's religions and the like. But as the Be'er Heitev points out, and he's commenting on the idea that about if it's for a specific purpose, the loopholes in the Ramah's comment. Right? Shemekablin mehen. The idea that charity is considered a very noble act. It's a good deed. We say that on the high holidays. Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. Right? Charity atones. So we don't really want to give them the credit for supporting us with charity. If you make a donation, if you make a commitment, it's different. So, the Be'er Heitev is pointing out a few things. The opening salvo of rejection, we understand. Separating Jew from support that's coming from idolatrous origins. At the same time, we recognize that there have been contributions from non-Jewish sources to Jewish sources. And then there could even be some that are of loftier aspirations. So on the one hand, we don't want to give them credit for doing a righteous act. So we want to distance it. At the same time, if there's a donation, if there's a promise, we've always accepted that. So, the idea, it's kind of a yes, but, or a no, and shouldn't take it. And then you have a number of the loopholes that allow for it. And essentially, if it's a commitment, if it's a pledge, then we certainly have precedent, it should be accepted. And that's why, I just a line from Rabbi Bezalel Stern, who's a 20th century authority, born in Hungary and moved to Israel. he has a whole discussion. Mutter lekabel nidava me'akum levinyan beis hakneses, v'afilu davar misuyam, v'afilu levakesh mehem nidava mutter me'ikaret. And he says, when all is said and done, if you filter it all through to contemporary times, if they make a pledge, you can accept it to build a shul, even if they want to donate something very specific. And if even to solicit them is technically permissible. That seems to be the more commonly accepted approach. There are those who feel it's distasteful still. And this comes up, in particular, it's an offshoot of the larger discussion about Christian support for the Jewish community, Christian support for Israel. This is kind of one strand of the conversation. But it seems that the more accepted or more implemented view these days is to at least welcome the support, if not to encourage it, although you will have some who will feel that some of those initial negative or prohibited sentiments are the ones that we should follow. And so, if we're talking about, in terms of building the Beis HaMikdash, while some would say you can't contribute, if you want to sell Trump the naming rights and you want to pick the amount, it would seem to be permissible in this fashion. So, a very quirky question from the press pool, leading to a conversation about our role building the Beis HaMikdash, the partnership we have with the divine in building the Beis HaMikdash, the potential for non-Jewish participation in the construction of the Beis HaMikdash, as well as the role of the non-Jew in moving forward the redemption or construction of the Beis HaMikdash and their donation therein. Happy to conclude with any questions, comments, or reactions.
Well, perhaps we can be more, even the strict ones can be more lenient when the idolater has a Jewish son-in-law and Jewish grandchildren. So maybe there's an opening there for our current president.
Yep. Okay.